tell you about Frank and Therese because I would not know how to be a light in the workplace without role models. And so I hope that we can celebrate this morning role models, your own, and the ones that I am going to share with you. So let's start with Frank Brady. I met Frank when I was 19 years old. He's a dad of my college friend, Janet. And so Frank came into my life with his effusive personality. And it was just beautiful. It just came from him. He has a sales background that was just exuding from him, all of his wonderful life and vitality. And I was also impressed that he had made the transition from a corporate leadership world with Correct women's wear, that's an old line, and then he started his own business after that cycle with his sons, and he called it Frank Brady and Sons, and then he was a wholesaler of women's wear. And I thought that was really cool from a 19-year-old perspective. He loved to party, and he loved his margaritas. In fact, every Friday, he would go to the local Mexican restaurant with the whole family and staff and vendors, whoever wanted to come, and just celebrate life. You know, it was just really beautiful in that way. And he adored his wife, and he adored my friend Janet as well, and that was so beautiful to see. And he had a solid faith in God. And what I really loved and thirsted for was his attaboy encouragement. That really meant a lot to me. And no matter where I was in my career as time went on, whether I was in investment real estate as a broker or as head of a private school, he was the type of individual that listened intensely, he confirmed what was good, and he gave encouragement. And once during an intimate conversation that we were having, a few times that we could get together, because he lived in Atlanta and I lived in different parts of the country, he would punctuate our conversation with a really cool old coin. This is an old dollar, silver dollar. And it was just a neat way to punctuate this beautiful conversation that we had. And he passed away a couple of years ago. And I learned at that time that, well, of course, there were many friends and relatives and vendors and coworkers who he also punctuated his time and conversation with him with a silver coin. And in fact, many of them kept them in their pockets years later as a reminder of his encouragement. And I want to give Frank's impact on my life a little bit of context, because 2 years before I met him, my mom passed away. And so I was living that typical motherless daughter experience, and I use that phrase because that's the name of a book. And that book so accurately describes what our family went through after that time, and my own personal stumbles and falls. In fact, I felt like I was reading my diary, and I didn't want anybody else to read it. I said, oh, this is brutal. But it was just so accurate, the changes in the family as well as my own life path at that time. And so he came in at the right time as an encourager, as a whisperer of wisdom that I just really needed. And so I thought, wow, one day I kind of want to be like Frank. And so as I reflect on Frank's influence in my life, I recall the handwritten cards I would write and the little plates of fruit that I would deliver to my employees before the day started. And I really wanted to support them because they were elementary school teachers. They were in the front lines of education. And so as the head of school, I wanted to tangibly show them something like Frank did. And then I think of a time of a gal that I knew some years ago. Her name was Therese Martin, and she wanted to change from administrative assistant work, which she enjoyed, because she wanted to also try pharmaceutical sales in particular. And at that time, I was in sales. And I thought, of course you can do it, and just gave her practical tips and encouragement to go get it. And years later, I remember we were visiting, and she said pointedly that it was my particular encouragement that helped get her over the hump, really spark that move. And I thought, well, that was really the Holy Spirit coming through. And it was coming through a Frank Brady style of encouragement, and attaboy, you can do it. So that all came together in that way. So then some years later, a second role model came into my life, and that is Therese Martin. And so I read her autobiography, and I could get inside of her head. She really shared what was going on in her life and her thought process. And she's a motherless daughter too. Her mom passed away when she was a 4-year-old, and she talks about the immediate change in her emotional state and how the structure of her family changed. And I thought, I can relate to her. So I got this connection right there that we have a sisterhood. And then when she went on to experience her work vocation, she writes about all these interpersonal challenges that she had with her coworkers, people that she was with side by side. And like some of them were when a person is like tapping on your pet peeve at work and it's really bothering you. And then there are times when you just don't click with a coworker or a manager or maybe even a client. It's just natural, she says. Sometimes you don't click, and that may even make you a bit more irritable if you're needing to work with them, or maybe you just would rather not. I mean, these things are like our workplaces, and then there are times that things come from the outside. There are people with communication styles that can rub you the wrong way, or maybe they're outright offensive. Well, she has a slew of experiences, and I can relate to them, very much so. And as I look in the audience and consider our conversations and sharing that we had yesterday, I think we can kind of agree that the workplace can be like that. We can have these challenges there, and I see some nodding of the heads. So I then, basically I've yet to mention the full reveal that Therese Martin is also known as Saint Therese of Lisieux, the Little Flower. And the book that she wrote is called Story of a Soul. And she worked out her vocation in a cloistered convent. And so in that environment, besides praise and worship and spiritual development, they ran a bakery. I mean, they made money running a bakery. They had a business. They also had a facility to run, and all the details of running a facility. And she, as an individual, grew into mentoring others as well. And she did this 24/7 with the same people every day. I mean, can you imagine your workplace being with them 24/7? In today's world, we're not. We usually go home at night and we have our weekends free. But it was in this sort of extra pressure that it's put on that she faced these challenges with wisdom and grace. That's what came from her. That's my conclusion of what came from her. And that's because she was a mindful conduit of God's love and mercy. Very mindful of that. That is what she wanted to do and what she wanted to be. And she believed that God also loved her and had mercy on her and everyone else that she worked with 24/7. She was very mindful of that as well, that it was effusive, it went to all others as well. And so she also speaks to how being a conduit was good for her. It was healing for her as well on multiple levels. And from my perspective, she's telling me that she filled one of her spiritual needs in that way. And we all have spiritual needs and basic human needs. And I look at that from that perspective as well. So because that she could respond, therefore, with this wisdom and grace, she gave her superior the benefit of the doubt. After that superior was kind of regularly severe with her and even would call out her weaknesses in front of other people, Therese's conclusion was, she doesn't always realize it, which is basically giving her the benefit of the doubt. And she could do that because she was this conduit, a very mindful conduit. It helped change her perspective and be a conduit of such grace. And then she also didn't turn around and give that woman a look that was driving her nuts with that pet peeve as well. And she also has many other examples in which the bar is raised. The bar is raised with incidences that happen in her environment in which she remains to be this conduit, and we can get inside of her head and say, I get how she did it. And that is helpful for me. That's kind of the way I learn, by watching others and figuring out and learning, hearing how they think as well. Now sometimes though, she admitted it wasn't so easy to be such a conduit, especially in the early days. And she shares a story about sometimes one particular associate was walking down the hallway and she'd scoot down the other one because she just wasn't up to it at that moment. I think that's a great strategy. So she shares that. That's our humanness. And I'm inspired by that because she strove to be this conduit of God's love and mercy, and that inspires me to be a conduit as well. As I reflect on her specific influence in my life, I find that I'm more aware of my little actions and definitely my reactions and how those can be a light for others. And that I'm now tapping into a deeper spiritual wellspring. Frank's enthusiasm, his role model, is definitely a wellspring for me at a time that I needed it, most definitely. And then she's showing me how to tap into something deeper as well, from where enthusiasm comes, actually. And in addition, I think of the professionals who tell me that they feel empowered after my Peace of Mind at Work seminar presentations, which is inspired by Therese's wisdom. After they have reflected on these typical workplace challenges and then reflected on their own situations, and after they've considered their go-to coping mechanisms when these things happen that help them reduce residual angerness and bitterness that happens, after these workplace hurts. They've also learned about the research benefits of being a conduit of profound respect and forgiveness. These two coping skills that are common, we just don't talk about them so much. So I share some of the awesome studies that have been done on that as well, and bridge Therese's wisdom with our workplace experience. And these coping skills are 100% in their control. And it doesn't mean that workplace justice goes away. We spoke about justice yesterday. It doesn't mean that policies and procedures are thrown out the window at all. The focus is on what we are in control of, what are some really powerful coping skills that we often use, yet I shine a light on them as well. And they bring a sense of well-being and a sense of connection once again. We connect once again with others as we use these particular coping skills. And so in closing, I want to thank God for placing both Frank, Brady, and Therese Martin in my life as role models, and celebrate with you the role models that you have as well. So thank you for this opportunity to share.